Call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
John Righeimer,
Here.
Stacy Hessel, Mark Helwig, Tom Duffy, Jeff Haney is excused. You have a quorum.
Excellent.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This meeting has been noticed to the public and news media as required by section 19.84 of the Wisconsin statutes.
Thank you. The agenda is set. We have public comments. Anybody online? No? Wonderful. The minutes are from July. So we will just so note that, and we will address the minutes at our next opportunity. So approved. Treasurer's report is number 8. Was there any need for approval?
What I think happened is I put the wrong minutes on here, so we thought those have already been.
Yeah.
So I, next month I'll put the August and the September on.
So there's nothing to approve at this time.
I grabbed the wrong one.
Moving along. Number 9, Finance Department report.
All right, we'll start with sales tax. Cruising right along, had another pretty good month in August. Wasn't our best month last year, beat us by $2,000. Still really looking forward to about 2 weeks from now, I'll get the September one, which will be reflective of July. So that's gonna be the fun one because it was just crazy around here in July if you were trying to get downtown or anything. The state did put out projections for the remainder of this year and then also for 2025. And for Sawyer County, the projection was $2,993,000 for 2024. You can see the number on here is $2,996,000. So feel pretty good that we're in the ballpark of what the state estimated. And actually last month, this report, it was $2,994,000. So we're really right in the ballpark. They did project $3,034,000 for 25. That's about where I would figure us to come in, maybe around $3,050,000. We did budget 2.9. I always try to be a little bit conservative, even though we do now have a little bit of a buffer because anything that we come in over that, we put in a assigned fund balance for a year when we do not hit the mark. Any questions on that? Moving on to budget performance, we're 2/3 of the way through the year. Revenues are all looking good. Some are a little over, some are a little under, some are quite a bit over. And the expense side, kind of the same story. We're right where we need to be. If I look at the net of the fund balance draw, we've got in the budget a draw of $750,000, all of that going to special funds. The net of that, we're at 71% of revenue, so a little bit over 2/3. And then on the expense side, we're at 62%, so a little bit under. So we're tracking very well. When I look at Health and Human Services, we are lagging on the revenue side a little bit. I'm not concerned. I think the money will be there. We're just lagging a little probably on our grant claims. The expense side is running well, about 4% under budget. Highway's looking really good. The revenues are lagging a little bit, but the expenses are behind even more. So that's good news. I think, we're still, because everything's usually a month behind, we're probably still paying early on the summer construction so that the expense side should catch up a little bit in the next month or two. But we're right where we were last year on highway. For CIP, had a few things. We bought one more squad, decked it out, finished up the jail camera project that they were doing last 2 months, and then did some courthouse door controls as part of the construction update. Okay, so then this isn't in your packet, but I did give you a handout of the 2025 budget, where we're at. The first thing I want to look at is a budget timeline. We're kind of right in the middle now. September 12th, the Finance Committee preliminary look at the budget. Last week was, I kind of stressed it was a first glance because we still had a few things coming in. Now we're getting our numbers pretty solid. So what I'll present today is going to be pretty close to our final presentation for the budget hearing, unless you guys want some changes. So anybody have any questions on the timeline? Yeah. It's in there. Oh, did I miss that? No, that's next. Actually, I skipped CIP. I did CIP too early.
The only question I have on a timeline, we talked about this, I know, I think got late to be on the agenda, but I don't know when we should discuss it, or if we should discuss it as far as presenting the budget. When we present it to the full county board, should that be a separate meeting or just part of a regular county board meeting? And we were just thinking because of time, if we have any thoughts on that. I don't know if we should discuss that right here and now or wait till.
We discuss it.
Oh, okay. Anybody have thoughts on that? I mean, and Ron and I were talking, just trying to understand how long a regular county board meeting can go. If this is on the agenda, depending what else is on the agenda, and does it make sense to dedicate a sole meeting just for this? At the same time, you got to bring people in for it, so it's, you know, there's pros and cons to it. don't know
I
if
think in
anybody-
years past, we've just had it as a regular county board meeting, so I don't think that it warrants having a separate and costing more money to have a separate meeting because we'd all get paid for a separate meeting. I think it should stay within the regular county board meeting, so then the public can plan on that.
That's what I was gonna say, same thing Stacy said, we've always had in the past, this, I mean, unless there's something big on the agenda now, I don't know, I haven't.
That's good,
looked
that's a
at it.
good point. Do we know if there's anything else that's gonna be big on it?
Maybe, but neither one of the items, there's two things that could be at the October meeting. One is the tourist rooming house, potentially. It's coming out of Human Services Committee to the board next week. But if the board wants to, there's no, I'm just gonna say my opinion, there's no rush either. Like, it could be acted on next week, it could go to October, or it could go to November even. The other item is the airport master plan. So next month, at the October Public Works meeting, there'll be a presentation on the updates to the master plan process and preferred alternative that the consultant's gonna present. And then the committee, before the master plan can move ahead more, the preferred alternative needs to be approved. So the committee will look at it. If they're comfortable, they'll send it on to the board. And the consultant, when we've worked with them, the timeline is for the county board to approve that piece in either October or November as well.
So the airport was probably gonna be a crowded meeting with a lot of public comment.
If it goes, like the
If it-
committee might
if it
decide
goes.
next month that they need another month to,
Yeah.
because they're gonna get it. The consultant's gonna have a public forum at the Public Works meeting next month. So I don't know if the Public Works Committee is gonna be comfortable saying, yep, we're good with that, send it on to the board, if they're gonna want a month to chew on that as well. So
And I'm fine either way, just not knowing if if the airport thing's on, that's gonna completely overshadow the budget. Maybe that's okay. I don't really see the budget as being controversial, but
you could look at it the other way. If the airport thing is moving ahead, we could punt that to November as well. Rather than have a separate meeting for the budget.
okay. Any other? Okay, thank you.
All right, so then I'll get into the budget here. These first few pages are gonna be exactly what we looked at last week, so I'll just kind of breeze through those quickly. The budget highlights, net to construction's about $140,000 increase. The salary increases are looking at 2%, 1%, and maintaining our steps and actually extending steps to 15 from the 11 that it is now. Health insurance, we've got at 5%. As I mentioned last week, I'm very confident we're going to meet or beat that, so I feel safe about that. The next slide, these are the 6 things that are levy limit exemptions. Andy, if you want to scroll down. All right, bridge and culvert construction and repair, we do take advantage of that one. As we do countywide, countywide EMS, payments to the public libraries and any general obligation debt. The 2 that are available to us that we have not yet done is property and casualty insurance premiums and court-ordered placements. So that's something we could look at in the future if we felt we needed to. Any questions on these? Net new construction history, this is through last year. So if I add this year, it actually is another pretty good bump, which is a nice trajectory that we've had. And again, like I mentioned last week, it's pretty remarkable. We're seeing highest increases we've seen in the midst of really record increases in the valuation as a whole. The budget requests is the next slide. Sheriff is asking for some court security administrative support. In meeting with the sheriff's department, this makes sense over having another sworn deputy. This work is primarily, almost exclusively, paperwork, that kind of thing. So
We can support that.
it's in the budget. Yep. Everything you see here is written in the budget. The next one is a zoning technician. You can see the cost for both of those. And then highway did ask for some additional road construction. 2 of the main ones being additional work on County B and County CC bridge work. And that's our portion of those. The state does pay for quite most of that, about 80%, if not more. So the next slide shows what the fund balance draw was as requested by departments. This number is different from last Thursday. I did get some additional requests from HHS since we met last. The general fund deficit stayed the same. Couple changes in funding. I had projected or calculated a net new construction increase at 1.32%, ended up being 1.322. That equated to an additional $209.
Can I ask a question regarding the last slide with the court security administrative support?
Yeah.
How many departments requested more employees?
Just these 2.
Just these 2?
HHS has a switch. It wasn't an FTE increase. They had a public health nurse that moved to Tennessee, I believe, did some remote work for a while. Julia thought we could better repurpose that FTE in, Andy, can you remind me of where it's going? Is it youth justice?
CLTS.
CLTS.
It's I'm not gonna be able to recite it, but we have a waiting list in that area. The caseload's growing at CLTS. Per this, it's a state funded mandated program. We can't have a waiting list. So that's why we'll be increasing a case manager there, shifting within the department. So the net in the human services department, there's no net increase in positions there.
Whatever seal.
Yeah, children's long-term support, there it is. Highway had originally requested 2 positions, but we worked through that with them, and if they continue on the trajectory they are for increasing work, then we'll look at that next year because there'll be additional revenues to support it. But these are the 2 requests that actually were formally made. There were other discussions, but these departments both requested it. Initially, sheriff was going to be a court security officer, but again, kind of work through the needs. The courts increasing expectations for court security. We already have 3 licensed deputized court security officers, which is more than most every other county around. A lot of them use bailiffs or lesser, not licensed officers. But when we talked about what their duties are currently, we found that the sheriff and staff, that they do a lot of administrative work, a lot of paperwork. And so that's why we said, let's pull as much of that off of them as we can. so they can do more deputy work. In addition to court security, it'll also free up some of their time to do transports, which we've had a struggle to do. And when we don't have officers to do those, we have to contract with a third party, which is expensive. So we expect it to help address both of those things. And then the zoning technician, again, I think we've heard of the workload increases in the zoning department with the number of permit applications and structures being added on, as well as, just not keeping up on enforcement. So the additional position there will help with enforcement, and it'll free up. Right now, we have code enforcement working with them on a lot of the follow-up. It'll help with that because court enforcement is going to be spread into some other areas, potentially the tourist rooming house if that does go through. And just last week, there was a meeting on invasive weed control and enforcing that ordinance. So code enforcement's going to be a part of that. So the zoning tech taking on more of that in that office will help with those items.
I thought the clerk of court, Marge, was looking for one.
She already has a halftime that's vacant.
All right, and then that next decrease in levy due to increased personal property aid. This is a new aid, not a new aid, but an additional aid this year. For years and years, we've gotten 17,000 and some change. So when I do my calculations in the formula, it's just an in and an out, same amount, doesn't affect it. Well, this year we got a bump of $50,876 in that aid. So then in the formula, and I had in the back of my mind, this could be, but I was hoping it wouldn't, but I checked Monday and the actual state revenue limit worksheet is out there now. And I had to deduct the full 68,000, the 17,000 and change plus nearly 51,000. So that is a decrease in our levy. And then, as I mentioned, HHS requested some changes in the contractual amounts, both where we contract locally and increase in our allocation for placements. So that went up about $400,000, almost $350 or so.
Up 400,000?
Yep. In the budget. Doesn't mean that we're going to spend it, but trying to budget conservatively. And then the two highway ones are still the same. So then when we looked at adjustments, I should mention J in zoning is probably getting a $10,000 grant. Doesn't affect the bottom line. It's an in and out where we basically contract the service, but it will help with what he's doing. It's a lake grant to do some mapping there. So the adjustments are pretty much the same. Still recommending that fund balance draw come from the HHS fund balance, not the general fund balance. The adjusted draw on the or the general fund side, and if you want to go down one slide, would increase by that $50,000 of that loss of levy that we have. So the new draw would be 681. For 2024, it was 750,000, so a little under it. It's probably a little more likelihood we'd have to draw this. We haven't had to draw that fund balance that we've had in there the last 3 years. So just keep that in the back of your mind. As I analyze the revenues on the department side, we're almost always over in all of them. So a lot of it, I'm hoping that when actuals come in, we'll be fine. But there is a chance there would be a draw. Partner organizations, this is not changed from what we looked at Thursday. There was some discussion on transit. We did get some additional information, actually made them look better. From 21 to 22, the audited statements show they added 330,000 of fund balance. So we do feel they're in a healthy position to not have to increase what we give them. But as I always say, you guys can do whatever you would like there. Our admin budget will probably be flat. Andy, do you want to add anything to that or?
No, nothing to add.
So looking at,
Mike, just a quick question.
Sure.
Or Andy, on the, so Senior Resource Center is $10,000 increase. I mean, I don't know if this is, there's been off and on again, the controversy with the southern part of the county. So is Senior Resource Center will cover the southern part of the county with Meals on Wheels and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? That controversy that keeps popping up.
Yeah, well, they're serving the southern part of the county and the winter area is the controversial area, and they are serving it through home delivery, or they'll deliver to the congregate sites. They're not preparing meals there. So that is happening. I think there's still frustration in the winter area, though, that they don't have the presence of the senior facility that used to be there. They're doing it on their own with the Waldo Center. I would say just, additional commentary on senior resource in general. Maybe this is a little more blunt than we've been in the past, but we acknowledge that they have increasing costs for food preparation, and so that's why we did put an increase in there. We're not giving them or allocating their request, but we've met with them multiple times and tried to talk about alternatives and how they do their work, especially in the meal area. The meal service is the most visible and prevalent thing that they do as part of their senior services. But they've been slow to make any changes or take us up on any discussions on centralizing kitchens, reducing the food cost. Through the course of working with them, we found out like Stone Lake, they're wrapped into a relatively expensive 20-year lease on that building. So I mean, we're trying to work with them, but at some point, I think I can speak for Mike. We're of the opinion, unless they're willing to make some changes, we don't know that we need to.
That makes complete sense. I mean, out of the 220, so is that were their full fund or they get stuff?
No,
from
they
the
get
state?
more than that from the state, from
Federal.
Guar for
Federal.
it's federal money through Guar.
What is their total budget? Or if we're 220,000, are they $1 million or what are they getting from the?
I think they're close, but if you can bear with me, I'll pull it up.
And remind me who owns the building? They own the building and lease the land from us, or how does that work?
Over here, this one over here,
Mhm.
that's theirs. It's on their land. It's
Okay.
their building. And I know at Human Services, I essentially said the same thing I just did about us trying to, if there's, we've had to provide advance funds because they're slow to get reimbursements from the state and they don't have a fund balance. To really help them improve, we've tried to facilitate changes. So I explained that to Human Services, and Mr. Savitsky, who serves on their board as a county board member, brought up that they need a new roof and could we pay for their roof? That's really not,
So it's not a county agency.
they're contracted by the state to provide
Right.
senior services because sometime in history, and I don't know how long ago that was, the county opted out of providing the aging program.
Right.
I think there's only 4 or 5 in the state that are that way, where it's contracted through a private agency, but they're not we provide them financial support so they can deliver the service, but their contract and obligations are to the state, not to us.
Correct. And so do most counties give money to support their senior resource centers? Or is it run through the ADRC?
I can't speak to the 4 or 5 counties that are separate from the county.
Mhm.
The rest of the counties, it's part of the county operation, usually part of Human Services or somehow connected with the ADRC, and yes, they do provide, those counties for sure provide levy support to the senior program.
Okay.
And that 220, what are we required to give?
What are we required?
Anything?
Nothing.
Okay, well, then I congratulate you for being blunt and stern with them. I mean, if we're helping financially, but not being listened to,
Yeah,
I think,
and-
then it's,
And I'll give you the practical from a board perspective. We're not required to provide anything. If we didn't, they would not be able to deliver the meal program. And that's kind of, again, like that's the thing the public experiences the most and relies on them for. And then when they, like in winter, when that center was closed and if the meal program in winter is not good, the county gets blamed as much as anybody does because it's.
And I'm all for the seniors. I think it's not knowing again what percentage we are of the fund.
Their total budget revenue is about 611,000.
Okay, so we're a
So
big part of
roughly
it. So when you're supporting something but not being listened to, that's frustrating.
I would just, if for some reason senior resource just said we're done, like they dissolved, we wouldn't have to take it over. I mean, the state would have to come to us and we'd have to agree to take it on. Is that the most likely scenario? Probably, because there isn't another agency that's probably readily equipped to take on that contract.
Who they're leasing from in Stone Lake, you know?
I think, is it the person who owns a lumberyard?
Owns a
Yes.
lumberyard, yeah.
They made an agreement.
They built the building.
They built the building for them and they signed a lease for it, 20 years.
On the Senior Resource Center, do we address the issue of the cold meals that were mentioned about earlier? Cold. They were saying the meals that were served on, they were cold.
Yeah, because of the timeline of how long it takes to get the meals delivered, some residents get cold, the meals are not hot by the time they get them, was the complaint was.
But I think the biggest PR message is that it is not a county-controlled agency. And I think that that's, if we could ever do a PR piece in the paper and just say like, this is the responsibility of the county. These are the agencies we're responsible for. And the senior center is not one of them because I do think, I catch a lot of flack in the community. My mom is a recipient of the Meals on Wheels and they all complain to me. I'm like, well, we just donate. I consider it a donation. The county donates, but we don't have any operating skin in the game. So until we have operating skin in the game, I think that should be publicly addressed. They're doing bingo they're Fridays at the senior center, and then now the community is supporting them. And a lot of those bingo players dog the county because they have to play bingo to raise money for the senior center instead of the county paying for it. And I think it'd be nice for them to know how much we are actually paying.
If they're looking for government to be the bad guy, who is the entity that they should be upset at? The state?
No.
Who? Then who?
No,
The board and operation of their facility, correct? Because that's who makes the decision. They're the decision makers. That building should be paid off. It's been here since I was little and I'm 50.
So the decision maker, but 400,000 is coming from the state?
mostly the state, they do take, people do.
And
They have
donations.
program income as well.
Donation.
They have a suggested charge for the meal. Not everybody pays, maybe 40 to 50%. Not even.
Not even that.
Mhm.
So
And
it's
they do fundraising.
it's a separate entity assisted by other government entities along with but no government entity is required.
The state is the one that's required to provide the service, actually.
So the state is required. So who at the state? Who is this, the governor? Is this the assembly? Who is this? Who?
Well, the state actually contracts with a entity that, it's probably DHS, GUAR, and I'd have to look up, that's the Greater Wisconsin Aging something. That's who actually provides the federal money comes through GUAR to all of these senior service agencies.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is if they feel that they're being mismanaged, part of it's their own. It's easy to point to government failure. They're pointing at us. It's not us.
When
Should they complain to Governor Evers? I guess that's my.
They can complain to governors, I'll just say the winter situation, those complaints were sent to GUAR and GUAR did meet and talk to the residents and have talked to the senior resource center about the complaints. And we've asked this question of GUAR. Senior resources is in, I won't say compliance, but they are providing the services that GUAR has contracted them to do. It is. Well, even when you get into what the minimum standards are, senior resource as far as the meals they're providing is exceeding the minimum standards because you're not required to do meals every day. There's a minimum of days that you have to provide.
Could I add to that?
Sure.
I'm on that
There
board,
you
so I can answer some of these questions. And we do offer meals 5 days a week, so there's deliveries 5 days a week. On our last meeting, we talked about possibly reducing to 4 or 3. Of course, the objections are that people won't eat frozen meals. They don't like frozen meals. They want the hot meals. Well, perhaps that's just not possible if they're going to get any meals at all. So we're going to try to reduce the number of deliveries, which will not make it popular. But it's the only place that I see at this point in time that we can cut costs because the delivery is very expensive.
So just piggybacking on the fact that I use and pay for my mom to have that program, they don't get meals if there's holidays. I mean, so they're used, the people that are getting serviced are used to that already. So if you went down to 4 meals, plus the portions are so huge, usually it's enough for 2 meals. So if you cut back on the portions, that might be more helpful than cutting back on the days. Just,
How many meals are we serving down in winter?
Oh, you're going to tax my memory. I don't remember offhand. She's got a complete list for us every month, but winter, if anybody calls, they get their meal. But it may be frozen, it may be hot. And again, like you said, the delivery from Exland to Winter in the furthest part south, it will not remain warm in the current, I mean, we've got all the warming totes and everything, but they will not remain warm forever. So
Is there a required amount of time that they can be in these totes and these warming devices?
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
it
laugh
could
myself
take an
because I know
hour.
there is,
It could
because,
take an hour to get to the house.
well, then they have to
Easily.
do something to keep these things at a certain temperature during that time period, because
They have warmers
as a
in
food
there.
shelf, we have to, you know, if we're transporting from, say, Marketplace to Stone Lake, they have to be kept at a certain temperature during that time period. So it's gotta be the same way. I mean, there's requirements.
And they do whatever it takes. I don't know what equipment goes in the totes. They're not just totes, they're warming totes. Yeah, so they're following state code.
Okay, I just can't imagine that you're delivering cold.
No, they're not
meals.
cold.
Okay, like I say, per se.
I don't know whose that is, or if it's because Jeff
Yeah.
is still on, or.
Well, I don't, we don't have to belabor the point. I think Stacy has a good point, though. I mean, for what it's worth, it is a PR knock on us. I hear it all the time too, and I guess what the people that are saying is they either misunderstand or they want to increase taxes so there can be more Meals on Wheels. But I'm not saying we do that, but I think they completely misunderstand our role in that. And instead of being thanked for $220,000, we're put as the bad guy, and that's unfortunate.
Can I just add that I want to give kudos to the Meals on Wheels program though, because they don't leave the meals without making sure that the recipient gets it. And so it's been a lifesaver in a lot of conditions where they've had to call the ambulance because they've knocked on the door and then that person's, so
It is a
it's-
wellness check.
Yeah, it's more than just the meal, so like keep that in mind. I don't know if but kudos to that. I just think that they do need to listen to the changes and not just be this is how we've always done it kind of thing.
Sorry, Mike.
It's all right.
You may
Good
continue.
discussion. Moving down to the next slide then. Preliminary revenues, just a moderate change from what was presented Thursday, and that's due to the $50,000 decrease in the tax. The column on the far right and the highlighted yellow one would be our recommendation, again, as I talked about last Thursday, with
Oh, I'm sorry, I was a page ahead.
okay.
Just keeping you in mind there, sorry.
It's all right. The ambulance had a net income in 2022. So I've deducted that from the levy for 25. So then that is bringing the levy down due to that. So if we did nothing, that would bounce back next year, plus we'd have a normal CIP next year. So we'd see more of a tax increase than usual. So what I propose is we smooth that out by filling in that decrease in ambulance with either CIP or, well, CIP of some sort of debt issue. So we would either take one of the things that's in CIP for 26, move it into 25, or, you know, going back to our tower discussion, one way or the other, we're gonna have some cash outlay there if we choose to do that. So that could be a way to fill that in as well. So any questions on that theory? Andy, you want to add anything? And then moving to the expenditures. There again, the change would be to debt service. Right now, if I just put in what we have requested, the debt repayment would be 2.6 million. Recommendation would be to go to about 3 million to cover that ambulance shortfall for 25. Not shortfall, but under levy, I should say. So any questions here? The tax levy then is the next slide. I've got both 23, 24, 25 if we didn't do the extra, and then again, the far right is what we would recommend. So there's just a very moderate increase in the general tax levy. Ambulance would actually go down a significant amount. And then the debt service would increase a lot to fill that gap. I know the percentage looks really high, but the dollar amount is quite a bit less too. And then also highway would go down and we would do a transfer to highway. Just how everything worked out. And then, so you can see the property taxes, what we're proposing would increase 3.46%. And then the mill rate actually on the recommended version would go down 1 cent from what was proposed last Thursday. And that's due to that $50,000 that we cannot levy now. Any questions here? This next one is something we looked at last Thursday as well. This would just be a potential funding for the towers if we chose to do those on our own. And I've got an elevated levy in 25. Again, that would be a way of filling in that ambulance under levy. And then way down in 2034, it would increase because the reason for that is the debt issue of the 4 million for the completion of the courthouse, 23 and 24 CIPs, and that Cooper property that we purchased. And we paid off the stifle loan with this. That expires in 2033. So to keep the overall mill rate the same, we could do an elevated increase in that last year.
This is the 3 million if we just did for the law enforcement
Correct.
enhancement.
Yep.
Do we know if there's offering our credit line as an option for the
Correct.
citizen side. Do we know what the cost, is there even an avenue to say we want to do it all? You know, this is paying somebody 3 million, right? What's the cost if we didn't offer we didn't lend our credit line out, we just used our credit line to hire somebody to do the enhanced cellular broadband? I may have asked that in the past, I don't remember. Like Taylor County, I guess.
Yeah. I don't have an exact number for Sawyer County, if you just said, okay, we're gonna take what Buck Tussle said, they're gonna put in 112
Right.
miles of fiber and 7 towers. I mean, new towers are $500,000 is the budget number they've told, both companies have said. So that's like 3.5 million. And I did have a conversation with a couple of the local providers, just a general like, hey, when you want to put fiber in the ground, how much does it cost per mile? And they said can go from 30,000 a mile if it's just straight line, nothing in your way, to 100,000 if you're going around through rock. So they said if you want, they said they believe the average though they pay is closer to 50 to 60,000 a mile. So 112 miles is going to be, I don't know, $6 to $7 million. So
In addition, so if we did 7, so roughly 10 million.
10 million. And I think the other conversation I had with the local providers, just as, background kind of work, is they, one of them used to be in the cellular business and they said that's harder than you think unless that is your business, to have those relationships with the cell companies that will lease space.
Yeah.
That's,
Well, yeah, I don't want to be in the cell business, but
Yeah.
we would have to hire a bug tussle or something like that.
GenCom.
Or is it, I get confused.
no, it's like a company that would be like a broker between you and the cell phone
Correct.
companies to lease space on your tower.
Is that something, I don't know if this is appropriate, if we say no to the bug tussle proposal as is this something we can pick up at a later time to consider?
Well, that's something I was going to mention when we get to that, not part of the budget, but, I've heard the concerns, last week, or was that 2 weeks ago? Whenever we discussed
It all-
tussle. I thought it was a really good discussion because I think the board itself got a flavor for what people on the board think, and so did I. So if we did not go with bug tussle, but, cellular service and broadband's still an important thing to the board, then I think we should pick it up at a later conversation and look at how we can accomplish that through other.
Next year's budget.
Yeah,
Or the-
others, next year's budget or a separate project, or go to the cell phone, we're gonna start seeing applications for BEAD funding from the providers we've worked with before. So that'll help address, you'll get to see where broadband is going. But if we're prioritizing cell service, then we should start directing some time and resources to that.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't want to get on my soapbox again, but I just think it's imperative for the law officers, emergencies, safety. I would completely agree with that. But then there's also I'll just say the citizen safety, that's a concern too. It is, I think I said the last time, I mean, you get out there and it's dark and there's no cell service and, it's
Just
something we need to
for all-
consider.
Something that Bug Tussle was gonna do is put these cellular, not, wireless on these towers. I don't know if that's something, if we went and did that also ourselves. Maybe look at that also.
Yeah. And I think we could look at doing it ourselves, or if we're gonna invest in towers, that might be part of our incentive to somebody who else would do that, is to give them, attractive.
Towers.
If we want to facilitate that and incentivize a company to do that, we might need to give them a really good deal to use the towers.
Well, it's, I mean, if we build, we're talking about at least two right now,
Mhm.
to get things moving. If we put that kind of stuff on those towers ourselves instead of Bug Tussle doing it
Right.
ourselves.
Yep.
Yeah, and I just think, and this is just my opinion, I mean, it's gotten a little better over the years, but not really. And I just don't see any scenario where the private sector comes in and satisfies that need. And so I think, if we want it to be, it's up to us to do it, if that's what we want. Or do we just say we're content with a lot of blind spots, throughout the area? So anyways.
Yeah, I get nervous when you say we'll put it on there, because I don't want phone calls on Saturday that my internet's out. Can you come fix it?
No, yeah, exactly. I think we have to, we may have to spend the money to do it, but you would not, you would outsource. That's my favorite word, right? You would outsource the services. I did start out my sales career 35 years ago selling cell phones, but I don't want to get into it again.
All right, and then the last slide for the budget is just the mill rate history. And again, this reflects that 1 cent decrease from last week's presentation. Any questions on the budget before we move on?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to double back to the 2 new positions we're talking about. So both of those have the potential for additional revenue generation. We didn't include that in the revenue side at this point. But the zoning technician, if they're potentially, and again, it's an if we can accomplish more enforcement and a little more speedier permit process, there should be more permit or penalties that would come in generated by that position. And then for the court security administrative, what we've discussed with the sheriff, and not going to say this is the sheriff's committed to this yet, is that because that'll be an administrative position, one thing we've talked about in the past, but they have not done there, is implement a daily inmate fee. So right now we charge a booking fee of $25 when somebody's booked into the jail. They have to pay a $25 fee one time. More than half the counties, I don't have a current number, but more than half also have a daily inmate fee. So they charge $15, $20 per day that an inmate is sentenced in jail, that the inmate has to pay then during their stay. So that, there is, and I'll just be honest, like if you research that, there's differing schools of thought as to whether that's good or bad, because there are some advocates who believe that if you're assessing a fee on an inmate that's incarcerated, that's not giving them maybe the best road for rehabilitation because they're coming out of jail with a debt.
They're already sentenced, and then you're.
Yeah, but they are also, that's the other side of that. So the sheriff is, I think, on board with it. We have been researching the how much the inmate fee could be, and then what's the collection procedures and how much do counties actually collect, because obviously not everybody can pay, so that it goes, you have to kind of chase people down to get them to pay. But generally we're finding that counties are collecting about half of what is assessed. So there could be, based on, and this would be, we're only talking about doing it to sentenced inmates, not inmates that are awaiting trial, but that could offset about half of the cost of that position based on what we think they could collect. So
What do you do with innocent prisoners?
they still are charged, but then they get time to pay. I mean, you don't hold, you still let them out when they're supposed to get out, but you put them on a payment plan or. Yeah, I don't have that. Yep. Well, you put them on a payment plan, you make it as, what we're finding is you put them on a plan, you make it as reasonable as you can for them. If ultimately they just bail, they go to collections actually. Then it comes a tax intercept down the road for them. But one of the reasons they haven't done this in the past is because it does take administrative time, but we are creating an administrative position that we could make that part of that person's time to do the billing and collections.
Nope. So then moving on, here's a mid-year breakdown of the legal fees, both by department and by law firm. Give you a minute to switch back here. Right there. So this is through June, and like I said, you can see how much we're spending on the departments that use the service and then how much we're spending to each individual firm.
This is only through June what we paid?
Yep. It's a significant line item on the budget, yeah. Any questions? All right. So then looking at the investment report through July, another strong month of over $100,000 in interest earned. Among all departments or all funds, we're up to almost $750,000 through July, so that's great. You can see in here that we have both the Franson CD and the PMA CD that we just purchased in July. And even though those don't necessarily accrue interest or you don't get it monthly, it's paid out when it matures. We are accruing it on our own to just kind of show the increase month by month. Any questions there?
I've been asked by by a constituent, why we're investing, in CDs and things like that. They don't feel that it's necessary that we do that. Can you, advocate for doing that and what we can spend that money on. Can you remind the general public?
CDs versus money market, or what's the question?
Risky.
Well,
I think there's I mean, in your, I don't want to speak for you, but like that I think it's a misunderstanding that we are playing the market.
yeah, none of this is market. It's all FDIC insured investments, very safe. Yep. Yeah, I mean, we would have $1 million hole in the budget if we just let it sit and not gain any interest.
And that's what she's saying. Please explain that right there, correct?
So that's the general public. I mean, I think any PR that we can give as to why we do what we do is a good thing. I mean, whether it's what we're accountable for or what we're. Whether it's what we're accountable for, you know, or just going back to what we're not responsible for. I think anytime we can say that publicly, we all know as a committee, but if people are watching this or if it gets put in the newspaper, it'd be nice to know and put these rumors, risks, whatever at bay. So that's what I'm trying to do.
These are all bank holdings. We are not playing the market. There's no investment in stocks or anything. So.
Getting the best interest we can, money we have.
Yep. And I would offer up a kind of a broader statement, like when there's been pushback from municipalities and the counties on the legislature that we don't have enough money to deliver the mandated services that they want us to deliver, their response is use the tools you have, because we're not going to, remove the levy caps. And so, the debt service we do, and that's becoming more and more unique, how some counties are borrowing the debt in order to generate those funds. That's a tool we have. Investing our funds, and statutorily it's controlled as to what we can invest in and not invest in. So we invest in to get a return on the taxpayers' money so that we don't have to levy more taxes.
Mhm. All right, then moving on to ambulance billing analysis. The aging report, the last 3 months now are looking much better. We had been kind of on a downward spiral where our percent current was dropping every month and the percent greater than 120 days was increasing every month. Well, we have reversed that now and everything's looking much better. Almost half is now current, which is a good position to be in. Any questions on that? The average calls per month. I think what I noticed with the next few slides we're looking at is we've really settled into what is our normal now. We had some up and down, but if you look at the last 3 years now, we're pretty consistently at about 160 calls a month. And that's, we can say, well, yeah, we used to be at 215 and we were, but for 3 years now, this is where we're at. And I think that's just where we are now. I don't know why it is, but it's what we're getting. The next slide is the average billed per month then off of those calls. And that's fairly consistent. 22, 23 was a little bit higher. It's just due to what the calls are and where they come from, because there's mileage involved and whether it's a class A or class B or whatever. And the one thing that I've noticed under the new billing company, I've only been with them for 4 months now, is my monthly totals are changing. Like, so I think under the previous one, they were doing more of a cash basis where whatever they had at the end of the month is what they reported. Now this one is doing an accrual. So if something gets booked that actually happened last month, they're putting it back to last month. So I happened to just double check my numbers when I was doing this report, and I noticed that before they never changed, but now they are. So I just know that I have to be aware to make sure I'm looking and changing the past numbers so that we're not underselling ourselves. Because if I didn't, if they moved 30,000 back and I didn't catch that, well, then our average is going to be reflective of that and it would never show up. So it's just a note I wanted to make. Looking at average collected, that still has a little bit of a variance, but there can be so many factors to that. And with the new billing company, what we've seen is we have so much more information on who the payer is, who's getting billed. So that can explain the changes year to year, month to month, because if we're higher on Medicaid, Medicare, our percentage is gonna be lower just because they pay at such a lower rate.
We've been with them for 4 months now?
4 months, yep.
So we'll see things, but more and more in the future.
Yep, and the last part of this presentation is their static report that I get. And that's where we're gonna start seeing more information from them. Especially once we hit 12 months, then everything's gonna be very clear of where we're sitting. The next slide is a percent collected, and, there again, actually, we've been through 3 different billing companies. It's a fair amount of consistency now, you can see. We had been down for a little bit, and now we're climbing back up. Last year was a good year, percentage-wise. And then the dollars billed and collected per month. And again, the billing is actually starting to level out. We did have a bump last year, but otherwise we've been around $1,450 in billings or amount billed per call for each of the last, really up to 6 years now, because it's 3 years in the prior 3. And then the collections are changing a little bit. I think the last 2 years, our billing percentage has been, well, it was better than the 3rd year ago. And we're about back to where we were prior in that green bar as far as percentage. Any questions on either of those? Next slide is where the calls are going. Again, closer you are to the city of Hayward, the more the calls are, with Winter being a major call center as well, which makes sense. It's a big area and fairly highly populated, I guess, compared to some of the outlying areas of Sawyer County. Any questions there? The ambulance income statement, we're showing a little bit of a loss right now. Again, the way this billing company does it, I think we'll see maybe a little lag in when we're getting the money sometimes. So hopefully that will catch up by the end of the year. The unfortunate thing is I have to set the levy before we know how the year end went. So it's it'll always have a little lag. Our fund balance potentially could go negative in that fund if we have it always is a little bit, because you're always a month or a year and a half ahead with a lot of this stuff. So it's hard to project exactly, but we do the best we can. The ambulance charges written off, you're going to see a negative amount on top. And in May, LifeQuest wrote off a whole bunch. You can see $38,500. Well, I think they decided they can collect on some of that now. So that was a reversal, that 11,000. And you'll see that on the next slide, which is the charges to collections. There was a big amount again in going to collections, and the items reversed, that would include that $11,000. So even though they're not our primary billing company anymore, seems like they're doing a good job trying to wrap up what's out there with them still. The next slide then is the percentage of dispatch calls that actually result in a billed run. And it was low this past month, July, 2 months ago now. And again, how this graph works is the blue line is month to month, what the actual percentage was. The, I guess, light green line is the running average percent billed. And then that darker green line that is static is a point in time when we switched from our very first billing company to the second one, and now we're on our third. And the only reason I keep that line in there is you can see originally the green and blue lines, light green and blue lines, were fairly close together. And ever since then, we've varied a lot. Really has nothing to do with the billing company, but it's just interesting to keep looking at that. This is dispatch calls versus billed runs. This is year by year. So 24 is not a full year, and you can see it's down, and there's been some variation when you look at the calendar year. But the next slide is 12-month cycle, which is what we look at most of our ambulance data from, and that is pretty consistent then. Always right around 75%. So that's all from our old presentation. Then I'll get into the static one that I get from EMSMC. And we don't have a lot of data yet. It does show the charges per month, the trip count. And again, these numbers, you're actually going to see them change even the past months as we get the next month report. And the two charts down below, if you want to scroll up just a little bit. So this is one of those ones that once we get to a full 12 months with them, it's going to make a lot more sense. Because right now, that green line that looks like it's got a real smooth increase, that's because it's starting from 0 and then adding an amount each month. So that's going to look like that chart we look at with the blue and the green, where eventually they're going to get closer together and you'll be able to see the month-to-month variation a little bit more. And the chart actually does not have the current month in there, so that is through June, not July. And what those represent is the first one is the trip count, so it's the calls that we had. And then the next one is average loaded miles. And that must be that well, I thought it was this gross trip charge, but I don't, that could include the actual car charge plus mileage. So anyhow, it doesn't look like it's pulling from the data that's on here, but what this will show us is how far the trips are going. And when I talked earlier about, well, the average build changed year to year. Well, this shows even in month to month how drastically different the average miles on the trip is. So that's why the billings can vary quite a bit too. If we have more closer to the centers, then it's not going to be as much. If they're going more remotely, then the charges will be a little higher. These next few pages really just show the breakdown, like I mentioned, of who the primary payer is. So we've got Medicare, Medicare Advantage, insurance, Medicaid, Medicaid MCO, and patient, which would be self-pay. Facility, that would be probably transports, and then other government payers. So we do have many, many sources of who's the primary payer is. And it's nice that they give the dollar amount for each. Because when I look at this, I can see, yeah, we're very high on Medicare and Medicare Advantage. So that's why, we've always talked about a goal of recovering 50% of the billing. When we're stacked that high on Medicare, that's going to be really hard to do because they don't pay it 50%. So that's always going to influence our numbers. And then the last page just shows a couple more graphs that are interesting. You've got an aging chart, but then it shows the percentage, in a breakdown pie chart, makes it easy to look at of if they're current versus 31 to 60 days, 61 to 90. And then the one on the right is also very informative because that shows the payer percentage by breaking it down by payer, Medicare, Medicare Advantage, that kind of thing. And patient is remarkably high, I think 35%. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Any questions?
Yeah, that's all I've got.
Thanks, Mike. Good job. Number 12, any future agenda items? 13, any correspondence, reports from conferences or meetings? All right, thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned.